Welcome to Flashpoints. I'm Jeff Pegues, along with CBS News senior national security analyst Juan Zarate. This framework of this deal with Iran is in place, not final yet. The administration has promoted this as something that will make the world a safer place. Is the Obama administration overly optimistic about this agreement?
Well, I think this is one of those types of framework agreements that is sort of like a glass that's half full, right? It has some dimensions that are interesting and important in terms of restrictions on the Iranian nuclear program, in terms of inspections, in terms of restrictions over time. But the half-empty part of this, the question of what's outside of the bounds of the agreement and whether or not you can actually trust what the Iranians say and pledge really becomes fundamental. The reality, though, Jeff, is that this is a framework to get to an agreement, and so the devil's going to be in the details, and there are going to be many devils at play here in terms of specifics and what the Iranians and what the West agrees to. Already, we've seen the Iranians begin to dispute the characterization of the framework agreement that was laid out by the White House.
Well, what do you think are some of the high points of this agreement?
Well, I think there are probably three categories. One is the limitation on the types of activities that the Iranians can engage in, and so that deals with the types of facilities that are used, the downgrading of them, or the limitations as to how they can be used. All with the idea that what we have to assure ourselves of is that any nuclear activity is for peaceful purposes, right? And so that's a strain that you see in the agreement. The second part is restricting the numbers of centrifuges and the amounts of material that the Iranians have, and I think that is principally geared toward the idea that you have to extend the period of breakout. You want the Iranians to not have the ability to break out toward a nuclear weapon for a period of a year. And then finally, the idea that sanctions will be unwound or lifted as a way of inducing the Iranians to actually deliver on the elements of this program and framework, which has inspections and transparency built into it.
There are a lot of questions about how do you monitor whether Iran is actually abiding by the agreement, right?
Right, and I think there are three categories of objections to this agreement. One is you're allowing the Iranians to maintain a nuclear infrastructure. They're not dismantling anything, even though the White House will say, and the agreement suggests, all sorts of restrictions. Two is the point you've made, which is how are we assuring ourselves that they're actually doing this? For example, the Iranians have yet to explain to the IAEA historically what they were doing with the militarization of their program. They've yet to answer those questions. So how can you sign a deal moving forward with even those fundamental questions still outstanding? How can you trust? And if you don't have open access to the inspectors anywhere they want to go, if the Iranians are going to be in control of that, how can you really trust that? And then third, the idea of time limitations, right? You've got a 10-year time limit at the outset, 15-year limit on some of the restrictions, and 25 in terms of some of the inspections. And so that sounds good, but the reality is, are you at some point legitimating a more aggressive Iranian nuclear program that frankly looks different from the restrictions we've put on friendly countries like South Korea? And so the objections are real, they're substantive. The thing I like about this, Jeff, is we can now start to have a debate about the details as opposed to the vagaries of what may or may not be discussed at the negotiating table. And we can, as I said before, test the ambiguities that are inherent in any type of negotiation of this nature.
We'll see how all this comes together when the papers are actually signed. For Juan Zarate,
if they are.
If they are, right? Good question. If they are. For Juan Zarate, I'm Jeff Pegues, and that is Flashpoints.